This article deals with the chronology of the Hebrew Bible. For material on the Christian New Testament, see Chronology of Jesus, Historical Reliability of the Acts of the Apostles, and Timeline of Christianity. For a historical look at the Bible, see Historicity of the Bible. For the composition of the various books of the Bible, see Dating the Bible. The chronology of the Bible is the elaborate system of lifespans, generations, and other means which delineate the events over the 4,000 years of narrative time between the creation of the world and the rededication of the Temple in 164 BCE. Establishing such a chronology was theological in intent, not historical in the modern sense, and functions as an implied prophecy whose key lies in the identification of the final event. Biblical scholars measure the passage of time from the creation to the Exodus by adding the ages of the patriarchs at the birth of the firstborn sons, later through express statements, and later still by using the synchronized reigns of the kings of Israel and Judah. The Exodus takes place in the year Anno Mundi 2666, or AM 2666, exactly two-thirds of the way through the 4,000 years. The building of the temple commences 480 years after that, and 430 years pass between the building of the temple and its destruction. The 50 years between the destruction of the temple and the decree of Cyrus and the end of the exile, added to the 430 years for which the temple stood, produces another symmetrical period of 480 years, and the 374 years between the rededication of the temple by the Maccabees and the Edict of Cyrus completes the 4,000 years. As recently as the 18th century, scholars of the stature of Isaac Newton believed that one could calculate the date of the creation from the Bible. In the 21st century, the Genesis account of creation has long since vanished from serious cosmology. The patriarchs and Exodus no longer appear in most serious histories of ancient Israel, and historians almost universally accept that Joshua and Judges have little historical value. Even the monarchy has come into question, and although scholars continue to advance proposals for reconciling the chronology of the books of Kings, there is little consensus on acceptable methods of dealing with conflicting data. Chronologies prior to canonization. During the centuries that biblical texts and canons developed, theological chronologies emerge at different composition stages. Though scholars have advanced various theories to identify these stages and the schematizations of time. These chronologies include a progenitor chronology that placed Abraham's birth at AM 1600 and the foundation of the temple at AM 2800. Alfred Jepson proposed this chronology on the basis of melding time periods in the Samaritan and Masoretic recensions. Distinct chronologies can be inferred from the priestly source, along with priestly authors of later biblical books, and the Deuteronomistic history, which purports to chronicle the reigns of the kings of Judah and Israel. The Nehemiah chronology, devised to show 3,500 years from creation to Nehemiah's mission. Northcote says that this chronology was probably composed by Levites in Jerusalem not long after Nehemiah's mission, perhaps sometime late in the 5th century BCE. Bousset apparently sees this schematization too, but calls it Proto-Mount, a Proto-Masoretic chronology, shaped by Dubliss, with an overall literary showing of 3,480 years from creation to the completion of the Second Temple, B. W. Bousset, and which had the First Temple at 3,000 years. The Saros chronology that reflected 3,600 years years leading up to the First Temple and 4,080 years from creation to the completion of the Second Temple. This scheme served as the basis for the later LXX chronology and pre-SP Samaritan Pentateuch chronologies. Masoretic table. While difficulties with biblical texts make it impossible to reach sure conclusions about their chronology, perhaps the most widely held hypothesis is that the Masoretic text embodies an overall scheme of 4,000 years, taking the rededication of the temple by the Maccabees in 164 BCE as its end point. Two motives may have led to this. First, there was a common idea at the time of the Maccabees that human history followed the plan of a divine week of 7 days, each lasting 1,000 years, and second, a 4,000-year history, even longer in the Septuagint version, would establish the antiquity of the Jews against the pagan neighbors. Samaritan Pentateuch. In the Samaritan Pentateuch, the genealogies and narratives were shaped to ensure a chronology of 3,000 years from creation to the Israelite settlement of Canaan. Northcote reports this as the Proto-SP chronology, as designated by John Skinner, and he speculates that this chronology may have been extended to put the rebuilding of the Second Temple at and even AM 3900, after 3 1,300-year phases. Septuagint. The Israelite chronology extends 4,777 years from creation to the finishing of the Second Temple, as witnessed in the Codex Alexandrinus manuscript. This calculation only emerges by supplementing LXX with the MT's chronology of kings. There were at least 3 variations of LXX chronology. Eusebius used one variation, now favored by Hughes and others. Northcote asserts that the LXX calendrical pattern was meant to demonstrate that there were 5,000 years from creation to a contemporaneous Ptolemaic Egypt, circa 300 BCE. Post-biblical theological chronologies. Second Temple and Rabbinic traditions. The first notable attempt to turn biblical texts into a theological chronology was the 2nd century BCE Book of Jubilees, beginning with the creation. It measures time in years, weeks of years, and jubilees, so that the interval from creation to the settlement of Canaan, for example, is exactly 50 jubilees. More significant, and still in common use among Jews, was the Seder Olim Rabbah, a work tracing the history of the world and the Jews from creation to the 2nd century CE. It allows 410 years for the duration of the First Temple, 70 years from its destruction to the Second Temple, and 420 years for the duration of the Second Temple, making a total of 900 years for the two temples. This schematic approach to numbers accounts for its most remarkable feature, the fact that it shortens the entire Persian Empire from over 2 centuries to just 52 years, mirroring the 52 years it gives to the Babylonian exile. Christian chronologies from Eusebius to Ussher. The early church father Eusebius, attempting to place Christ in the chronology, put his birth in AM 5199, and this became the accepted date for the Western Church. As the year AM 6000 approached, there was increasing fear that the end of the world was nigh, until the Venerable Bede then made his own calculations and found that Christ's birth took place in AM 3592. Martin Luther placed the Apostolic Council of Acts chapter 15 in the year AM 4000, believing this marked the moment when the Mosaic Law was abolished and the new age of grace began. This was widely accepted among European Protestants, but in the English-speaking world, Archbishop James Ussher switched the focus back to the birth of Christ, which he found had occurred in AM 4000, equivalent, he believed, to 04 BCE, and thus arrived at 4004 BCE as the date of creation. Ussher was not the first to reach this result, but his chronology was so detailed that his dates were incorporated into the margins of English Bibles for the next 200 years. Correlation of historical evidence and the Israelite kings. The chronology of the monarchy, unlike that of earlier periods, can be checked against non-biblical sources and seems to be correct in general terms. This raises the prospect that the books of Kings, linking the Hebrew kings by accession and length of reign, can be used to reconstruct a chronology for the monarchy, but the task has in fact proven intractably difficult. The problem is that the books contain numerous contradictions. To take just one example, since Rehoboam of Judah and Jeroboam of Israel began to rule at the same time, and since Ahaziah of Judah and Joram of Israel were killed at the same time, the same amount of time should have elapsed in both kingdoms. But the count shows 95 years passing in Judah and 98 in Israel. In short, data concerning the synchronisms appeared in hopeless contradiction with the data as to the lengths of reigns. Possibly the most widely followed attempt to reconcile the contradictions has been that proposed by Edwin R. Thiele in his The Mysterious Numbers of the Hebrew Kings, but his work has been widely criticized for, among other things, introducing innumerable co-regencies, constructing a complex system of calendars, and using unique patterns of calculation. As a result, his following is largely among scholars committed to a doctrine of Scripture's absolute harmony. The weaknesses in Thiele's work have led subsequent scholars to continue to propose chronologies, but, in the words of a recent commentary on Kings, there is little consensus on acceptable methods of dealing with conflicting data.